Hi, Stella.
Hello.
We have a really exciting episode today because we're talking about some new events that Genspect is putting on, which are actually going to be groundbreaking and really huge. So we'll save that for a few moments. But we wanted to just take a minute to introduce our two guests who have actually been on our show before. So I'll tell the audience a little bit about Joe. Joe Burgo is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst who's been in practice for almost 40 years. And he's particularly interested in the concepts of narcissism and shame. He's also a really big part of the BeyondTrans project through Genspect, and he'll tell you more about that. And he's also the author of several books, including The Narcissist You Know, Defending Yourself Against Extreme Narcissists in an All About Me Age.
Yeah. And Alasdair Gunn was working in academia when he became interested in gender issues. And after coming into contact with a group of parents of trans-identified boys, he wrote a series of Quillette articles on the topic under the pseudonym Angus Fox. As a gay man who tackled body dysmorphia in adolescence, Alasdair brings a unique understanding of issues related to teenage male development. Since then, his work in gender has focused mostly on design, marketing, research and communications in Genspect. And then recently diagnosed with a terminal illness, Alasdair has stepped back from day-to-day work and is keen to highlight the ways in which gender healthcare falls short of the normal standards of excellence we've come to expect from the medical industry.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation, and we will let you guys listen.
Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we probe the gender landscape within contemporary culture.
And we consider the implications of prioritizing personal identity over other aspects of the self.
This is the thinking person's take on gender.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Sasha.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
So we're lovely. I'm doing well. It's great to see your faces. And we're here with two familiar guests. I think anybody who's been listening to our show will recognize Joe Burgo, who was here to talk to us in episode 74, I believe, about shame and narcissism, 73. And then Alasdair, you are making an appearance. You've been kind of out in the public now for some time, but you joined us as Angus Fox to talk about gender dysphoria in young men and males. And welcome back with your real identity.
And that was in the early days of the Wider Lens. What was that, like episode?
It was episode 21 and 22, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Long time ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. And of course, Stella, as always, my lovely co-host. So we're here to talk about Genspect today and the Genspect vision for a very exciting event that I think our listeners will be thrilled to learn more about. The bigger picture. As you guys know, on a Wider Lens podcast, we talk a lot about seeing gender from a bigger perspective, a wider lens. And Genspect, of course, has a really solid vision for a psychological approach to gender, an approach that doesn't necessarily push the medicalization as the first line treatment. And we're going to talk about this amazing event that's happening in Ireland at the end of April. So welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you.
I'll say a little piece first, and then Alasdair, you can take it away with a more eloquent kind of version. But I suppose more than anything, I think Genspect is trying to merge all the different aspects of gender, and sometimes they get segregated. So let's say, for example, maybe WPATH has the medical, the emphasis on the medical, and somebody else might have the emphasis on the psychological, and somebody else might have it on the evidence base. Well, we're trying to do the sociological, the cultural, the legal, the political, medical. I know this is very expansive and very ambitious, but somebody has to do it. It's a kind of a merging of, let's look at, and it was Alasdair who came up with the idea, the bigger picture of gender.
Yeah.
And what is the actual because if you look at them all separately, you come to different conclusions. Well, as some people, for example, just see gender through a feminist lens. And that's a lens, but if you look at that and somebody else sees it through a medical lens and somebody else sees it through a psychological, they're missing things. So the grand plan is to offer the bigger picture at the end of April at a conference that's going to be held in the same town in the same week as WPATH are offering their conference. And we're just saying, please attend the EPATH WPATH conference. Please do. EPATH are the European version of WPATH. We'd be delighted if people attended, but we would also be delighted if they'd attend ours, because there's many things going on. There's a lot of layers to gender, and that's what we're trying to get a better understanding of the bigger picture. That's what I think.
Yeah, so the three of us, I think it's like all the best ideas. It's something that just happens, and then it's already happened by the time you know it's happened, if you know what I mean. We all sort of came into this in the same way. For me, part of it was hearing Eliza Mondegreen, who attended the last WPATH conference, and she spoke about how there's a missing layer. So you've got this top, very abstract, very political, civil rights-driven layer of the WPATH conference. It's people talking about trans rights, legislation, legal definitions. It's very abstract, it's very civil rights-based. You've got a very, very technical level, which is to do with the administration of surgeries and hormones and so forth, and really getting very technical about these surgeries. And it's like a sandwich with no middle, because what's missing is the human. So just to give an example of how this is failing, let's say you've got a young man and he wants to transition, and let's say he's mad about sport. He's absolutely mad about sport. So the technical people at WPATH will say, that's great, we can transition you, there's no problem there. Here's how it's all going to work. I actually think there's a lot of conversation to be had about that, but nonetheless. The abstract political civil rights layer will say, yeah, you should, trans people should be represented. But a human approach would have to say to that individual, listen, if you're big on sport, we need to have a conversation about this, because there are a lot of people who are not going to be happy if you compete against natal females. Now, that's what good healthcare is. Good healthcare does not just say, yeah, that's your problem. Good healthcare says you have a life to live, you have friends that we want you to keep, you have a family that you want to be in a relationship with. So, I mean, I'm in a very intensive healthcare at the moment, and every time I see my consultant, she asks me a whole stack of questions. And it's not because I'm super interesting, and it's not because she's super nosy. It's because she's treating a person, right? She's treating the whole person. And so she can't just say, oh, you've stopped socializing entirely and your diet has gone to the wall. Well, that's your problem. That's not appropriate healthcare. And so it's that missing human level that's what we've been discussing in many different ways so I think the 2 years I've known you, Stella. In one way or another, we've been discussing that. And so when we realised EPATH, their subsidiary, was going to be in Killarney, you know, these are people who've said, well, we've never heard of detransitioners, we don't know where to find them. Well, we're going to be really just down the road. So we're really very, calmly, not aggressively, but fairly insistently saying, this is your opportunity to see the bigger picture. So when Stella talks about uniting the cultural and the medical, there's a real ethos behind that, which is that the women who are looking at the implications of transgender ideology for female activities and spaces should be in the same room as people who are looking at the medical sides and the complications and all of the rest of it. Because these young people, once they go through this change, they are going to have to live in the world, and it's no good to send them out with a backpack full of ideology and nothing else. They have to be better prepared. So that's really the ethos behind it, and that's why it is a very ambitious guest list. It's a very exciting guest list. It's maybe unusual. It's not the kind of guest list I've seen before, but that makes it all the more exciting to me.
Well, and when the Standards of Care 8 landed, there was a lot of talk about trying to form some kind of an alliance of people, organizations who had different points of view to to WPATH. That didn't exactly happen, only now it's happening. Representatives from all these different organizations, from Transgender Trend, from Thoughtful Therapists, from SEGM. There's all these people who are going to be there. We're all going to be in the room together. Yeah, Sex Matters, right? We're all going to be there talking together. So, WPATH says no debate, and we say yes debate, lots of debate, please. And that's what it's about.
In many ways, I think when WPATH released their standards of care, and we did an episode on it, Sasha, and we went through the standards of care that they released, there was something so seismic happened with that standards of care. In 2012 when they released that other one, it was in a very different climate. But when they released that and they chose to have a chapter on eunuchs and they chose to give such little attention to the detransitioners, it kind of burnt a kind of a fire within lots of people. I know you, Joe, for example, you did the Beyond WPATH kind of initiative, which you can tell us about in a second, but which was like, oh my God, this is an appalling document, effectively. Let's all look at it. And I think since then, that was last September, and since then there's a feeling of, we can't just let that be. We can't allow WPATH to be a self-identified kings of gender and not offer other alternatives. And so Genspect are offering themselves as an alternative view. Yes, WPATH can do their thing. We're offering an alternative.
There's a lot of talk online at the minute where you'll see people who are really pushing increasingly young children into transition, social transition, and often medical transition. And in almost every single one of those cases, there's a parent, and I'm not defending nor am I attacking, I'm just saying this very neutrally, saying, well, this is all WPATH standards of care. The gender clinic we went to, they follow WPATH. The credentialism, they have surfed this wave of credentialism for so long. And the release of SOC 8, Standards of Care 8, when suddenly we see no to ethics, yes to eunuchs. It's so strange that I think it started to break a lot of people's faith in that credentialism and make people realise, okay, you may well be doctors. That doesn't mean you're God. That doesn't mean we can't question you.
Yeah, I mean, it was just sort of shocking, the way that I think, as I said from the beginning, they have discredited themselves, and they handed us a golden opportunity, really, to open the debate, to challenge this, this standing they have. Because really, the question I get asked a lot of the time, I'm sure all of you do, is, well, if not WPATH, then what? And there has to be a visible, credible alternative to this organization that managed to have captured all of the medical organizations in America, infiltrated institutions all over the world. We have to speak up, and I think we do better if we unite our forces and we come together and present alternative perspectives. I mean, that's what I was arguing for when I drafted that declaration, and I think that's what Stella had in mind when she came up with this brilliant idea to hold this conference, right? Let's speak up now, everybody, please.
Yeah, because the WPATH, as it says in the document, it's beyondwpath.org if anybody wants to add their signature, and there's thousands of signatures on it. And the idea was to kind of highlight the standards of care that have been produced are really not good enough. They don't offer enough care for vulnerable people. And therefore, we now need to come up with other alternatives. We need to look for other people to offer care to people who want to have a diverse approach to gender.
Right. And we're not saying we have the definitive alternative approach now. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying reject standards of care 8. Here's what you should have instead. We're at the beginning, right? We're trying to bring together disparate points of view so that we can come up with an alternative standards of care eventually, down the line. But the evidence base is really poor for the WPATH standards of care. It's very weak, and that needs to be pointed out, and it needs to be opened up. We need to start looking at all of it They've just been allowed to present themselves as the sole authority for too long, and that's just has to stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, to this point of like, well, what would the alternative be? I think we can easily slip into these binaries, for lack of a better term, where it's like either medicalization or never medicalize, or it's psychological intervention or affirmation intervention. And I think what's so great about this whole concept of the bigger picture is like, well, there are lots of different ways to look at this, and whether you're someone who's a physician or a therapist or a gender dysphoric person or a trans person or a detrans person, there are so many ways to understand what is going on here. And frankly, the more ways we can look at the situation, the better informed everyone will be, and the more real autonomy everyone will have to make decisions as a provider or as a person seeking medical care or psychological care. So I love that concept of the bigger picture. I'm wondering, like you mentioned, Joe, this idea of publishing standards of care. And I think we should just talk a little bit about what that means. I know that's not in the immediate plans, but like a standards of care, my understanding from the medical side of things is, what are the treatments that are best supported by the evidence? The interventions best supported by the evidence. And when it comes to psychological standards of care, it's interesting because the language is framed as, what would a reasonable professional do with this situation? And I found that interesting because that changes a lot depending on the context. As we all know from studying kind of the history of gender medicine and the various kind of phenomena that have taken place in the field of psychology and psychiatry, that changes a lot. So like what a reasonable therapist is doing right now when a 12-year-old comes into their office and says, I have gender dysphoria, is very different from how that would have looked 30, 40 years ago. So I wonder if like, what is the Genspect vision around this? Because I think part of what we need to do is create a culture where providers feel safe doing what their instincts are telling them to do.
The part of the problem has been is that WPATH has been advocating for the affirmative care model, which puts people like Stella and me out of business. Basically, that's what they want to do. They want to argue that exploratory therapy, which has a strong evidence base and has been practiced for a century, they want to argue that that's conversion therapy, and they want to put a stop to it. So, that can't be allowed. There has to be a voice for people like us. And, if you go back to the standards of care 4, or when it was the Harry Benjamin, Habigda, whatever, they used to say exploratory therapy was the first line of a defense. One should be very cautious that they recognized detransition and regret, so that we ought to proceed very slowly. Where is the evidence that they have? Why did that change? Is it just activist driven, or is there some new evidence coming forward that proves that actually wasn't a good idea? I don't think they have it. I don't think there's any evidence to support that point of view. It's an activist-driven agenda that, that makes it impossible for Stella and me and other therapists to work.
And myself.
And you, Sasha. Yes, sorry. I keep thinking of you as the host. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, think of it as, like, maybe we're selling pear juice and somebody else is selling carbonated energy drinks. We're not going to release a guidance on how to create carbonated energy drinks. Genspect is never going to be releasing guidance on how to do these surgeries, because that's not what we're offering. We're offering a different vision, which is that you can actually be comfortable and confident in the world and all the rest of it without medicalization. We're not necessarily going to barricade the doors to stop you medicalizing, but that's not what we're offering. So in terms of standards of care, I think there could be scope for standards of care. And if people are interested in that, sign up, come and join, bring your expertise, bring everything that you have. That in terms of the psychological and therapeutic elements of dealing with distress caused by gender issues, yeah, sure. But there won't be any medical, like surgical or pharmaceutical or pharmacological stuff, because that's not what we're offering. And you can, if you want that, you can go to WPATH. There's no shortage of places that you can go.
And so with the conference, we're starting with a keynote speaker, Helen Joyce, who released, she's Irish, and this is in Ireland, and she's been overlooked extraordinarily in Ireland. And so, like, she's a brilliant writer. She was the editor of The Economist for I think 20 years, certainly a long, long time. And we're usually cringingly proud of anybody who's gone abroad and done good, you know. We're very parochial, and we really, really, in Ireland, we really generally overpraise them. And Helen Joyce wrote this extraordinary book that anybody who knows anything about gender and trans and this world knows has done very, very well. And yet in Ireland, not a peep. It wasn't reviewed by the main newspapers. She isn't on the radio speaking about gender. It's a astronomical gap that she isn't being kind of lauded. I just can't emphasize how much this is not normal for Ireland. So we thought there's only one person who could open this, and that would be Helen Joyce. And so we are giving her due respect, and she's going to speak. And then after that, Maya Forstater is going to speak, because Maya took that case where she effectively, and we had her on the podcast, but she took the case where effectively to defend the right to hold her beliefs about gender critical beliefs, people would often call them. But what people don't know, I think, is that she used European law to defend this. And in Ireland and all over Europe, therefore, there's now precedent because European law was used to defend her right. You know what I mean? So while it was a case that was taken in England, it was European law, you know, like EU law. And so it's very, very relevant to Ireland. And so she's going to be speaking afterwards. And does anybody want to take up the gauntlet? I talk too much. I need to talk less.
Oh, we've got, well, shall we just show off? We've got Stephanie Davies, right? We've got Sasha, we've got Lisa Marciano, so we've got the whole of the Wider Lens team. We've got, who else have we got? We've got Benjamin Boyce, the lovely Benjamin Boyce. We have got an awful lot of Ken Zucker. We've got Lisa Littman.
Michael Biggs.
Who will be familiar to parents. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of detransitioners, lots of people who want to speak about their experience there.
And can we say a few things about what each person, for example, in the evening of the first night, which would be the Thursday evening. So the Genspect Conference is starting on a Wednesday in Killarney, which is a small town in Ireland. Lovely, picturesque, beautiful tourist town. And the EPATH conference is starting the day before. And that will be a very medicalised, I would argue very much a doctor's junket. This is, you know, come to a very picturesque place, have a little holiday, go and see the lakes of Killarney, you know, do the Ring of Kerry and off you go. Hopefully, having gone to the conference and learning that Genspect are holding a conference with, you know, in the same town, hopefully they will be engaged enough with their subject to take us up on the fact that we're offering a free ticket to anybody who attends the EPATH to come over to the Genspect. And come over and see, for example, we're going to have a panel of detransitioners on the Thursday night, on the first night, where they can hear different perspectives from detransitioners, just different perspectives of, and those detransitioners are going to be able to kind of take the table and speak as they wish about their issues. I think that's a really important. I think if we're not learning, you know, the way in airplanes they have the black box, and it's the most important part of air travel, is you look at the black box. What's gone wrong? We have the opposite. It's like, get the detransitioners away. Don't let them speak. We're doing the opposite. We should have a look at when it goes wrong. We should be all over. We should be massively focused on what's happened with anybody who detransitions so that we can learn what should have happened, what would have been better.
And it's so strange because it's like if you phoned the fire brigade, if you phoned emergency service and said, my house is on fire, and they said, yeah, but not all houses are on fire. It's like, what's that for a response? But that is what we get over and over again. Is, yeah, but, you know, this is just a small minority. Well, that may be. I mean, Lisa Littman has obviously done a wonderful job of highlighting the problems with those statements. But even if she's wrong and that's right, it is still worth talking about. And then to pick it up, we also have Colette Colfer, who's going to be talking about gender ideology as a religion and the kind of religious and spiritual aspects of this. And we've got Leisha Iega de Bruyne, who's going to be talking about the law in Ireland. And we've got, my goodness, we've got so many people.
We have Lisa Marciano, our
Mondegreen.
friend and colleague, Eliza Mondegreen, Dr. Julia Mason. I'm just kind of looking here, and there are so many amazing names. I just want to make sure kind of lift them up.
When you look at the difference, like Eliza Mondegreen, who has her finger on the pulse of what's going on in the trans community. She's a young graduate. She's very very into what's going on the ground. And then
online,
right beside,
especially.
Yeah, she's got a complete cultural understanding of what's going on. And then beside that, to have Dr. Julia Mason, who's a pediatrician, who's all about, the child development and looking at the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and where they've gone wrong. That's merging. That's a proper merging of all the different elements of what we should be looking at when we look at gender identity. So hopefully I'm hoping that people who come to this conference will walk away thinking, you know what, I was all about the feminist perspective, or I was all about the psychological perspective, but now I've thought about the cultural, or now I've thought about, you know what I mean? I've added to my perspective, no matter what perspective it is, you know what I mean? Because the legal is really, when you start getting into the legal, for example, Leisha from the Countess will be speaking about the legal, the implications of self-ID, which is in Ireland. And it is so unthought out in Ireland. They didn't think about it. They haven't thought to the end of the sentence with that. And she will kind of explain, you cannot just legally change children's gender identity on their birth cert and then tell them that they can't change it back when they detransition. Like, hello? Because that's exactly what's happened in Ireland. So there's people who will be attending the conference who have transitioned, who have detransitioned, but now are stuck with the male, marker on their documentation because you can't change back. We hope you're enjoying this episode of our podcast. We work very hard to maintain high quality content for the show.
To take an even deeper dive and support the show, join our listener community for access to exclusive content, practical tools, and resources supporting gender and identity exploration. We're so grateful to our sponsor, Genspect, an international organization which offers an alternative to WPATH, providing a range of education, resources, and supports to anyone impacted by gender distress. Genspect unites many different organizations globally and gives voice to thousands of previously untold stories. For more info, visit genspect.org.
And thank you to our sponsor, RIME. Rethink Identity Medicine Ethics is a non-profit organisation dedicated to improving long-term care for gender-variant individuals. Visit rethinkime.org to learn more.
And now back to the conversation.
How many of those people that we talked about on this list of speakers have been guests on A Wider Lens? I mean...
Oh, so many.
I know
I think nearly everybody, but not everybody. And actually, some of these people are probably coming on in the near future. So a lot. It's amazing, actually.
And that's what I think would be so exciting for your audience, right?
Yeah. And at some point during the conference, we haven't been able to nail down exactly when, we're going to be doing a live stream of the podcast, since we will be there. And our lovely friend Lisa Marciano, the Jungian analyst, is going to be joining us. And so we'll be able to talk a little bit about what it's like to be there, like live on the ground. And then we'll be releasing that episode. It'll be live, of course, and then we'll release it also later. So it's going to be quite remarkable. I'm curious about something. I'm not as involved in the behind the scenes aspect, but given that the UPath conference is going to be there, also the EPath, has anybody who's a prominent figure in that conference been like notified or formally invited? Like, is there going to be any attempt to kind of cross invite or collaborate in that way?
Yes, we're not saying a massive amount of that yet, because this is a very fraught kind of environment.
Yes.
But yeah, there's already guaranteed to be a good share of overlap, because we should remember WPATH is not a monolith. There are questioning voices in WPATH. There have been questioning voices in WPATH for years. And there are people who are kind of staying. They're not going to leave. Kind of like if the neighborhood goes bad and you're just like, nope, I'm staying here. It's where I was born. I'm not going to, that sort of a mentality. And good for them. Good for them, because it's better that they're in there than that nobody who's questioning this is in there, in my view. So there'll definitely be some overlap, and that's already kind of being chatted about behind the scenes. And there'll be overlap in the pubs and the restaurants. Killarney is not a big place, so you've got these two conferences with two very different views.
That was the first response Michael Biggs made. Michael Biggs, of course, he was on our podcast, and he is an extraordinary wealth of knowledge about, he really is. He's really, really, really penetrated the world. Between the Tavistock and the FOIs that he sent in around suicide, and then around puberty blockers, and then around the mental health of puberty blockers. Hannah Barnes' book in many ways couldn't have been written without Michael Biggs' forensic investigations. And then Michael Biggs has turned his beady eye to Amsterdam and the Amsterdam clinic, and he's busy doing FOIs. So he's giving a talk on the Friday morning, and I'll be very interested in hearing that. But that was his first response when we invited him. He said, there'll be lots of interesting conversations around Killarney, because he was going. Of course he was going. Lots of people would be going to EPATH. And then they heard, this Genspect, bring it on. People's response has been very positive. It's like, yes, it was, one of those feelings of course this should happen. Of course this should happen. You know what I mean? Of course we should be looking at bigger pictures in the same town where you get to look at both sides. You go to see the Coca-Cola conference, and then you go over to the Pear Juice and you say, okay, yeah, different drinks, different offerings.
And I think we should also put in a little plug for the three of us. We're not just organizing it; we're all also speaking and participating. So, Alasdair, what are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be giving a talk. Well, I'm doing a few things. So there's going to be a debate about pronouns, which is going to be very interesting.
Oh yeah.
It's not exactly what you would expect. It's not just yes or no preferred pronouns. And I want to give a talk. I want to give a talk which is very sort of, what's the word? Concrete and very broken down. So I want to talk about the healthcare I'm receiving, and just keep comparing it to the healthcare that you receive in gender care, and point out the differences, because there is there is an expectation of excellence that we have of healthcare, because it's something that matters. It's like, if you're working in blue light services, you kind of have to try and be excellent at all times. And this has really fallen apart. I mean, you think about our friend, I know all of us here know in one way, Grace Ladinsky-Smith, and she phoned her surgeon and said, I'm unhappy. And the surgeon is on record publicly as saying that she thought it was a joke. Now, it doesn't matter whether you've just dealt if you've just dealt with an ingrowing toenail. If somebody calls you up and says, I'm not happy with the care I've received, you stop and you take that seriously. And the more serious the medical situation, or the more serious the risk, and let's remember it's WPATH which is putting out these lurid statements about suicide and all the rest of it, so they can hardly say, hey, let's minimize this. The more serious it is, the more serious you have to take these various issues, and that's not what's been happening.
Can I just say something about this? I don't want to share too many personal details, but I have a very dear relative who's in the middle of some very serious cancer treatments, and she has never really experienced a serious medical issue before. She's much older. She's in, her late 60s. And she said to me, I was so shocked, Sasha, that even when they were getting ready to discharge me, they had a physical therapist come to talk to me about all of these different aspects of how my home is set up so that they make sure that with the kind of limitations I have in my physical environment that I know exactly what to do. And he kind of coached me on like how much circulation I need to be getting, how much walking I need to be doing. And this is almost tangential to the actual treatment she's receiving, but it's like this whole person kind of care. She was shocked and so impressed. And I mean, I thought it was actually kind of sweet because I thought to myself on one hand, yeah, of course. Like they're treating a whole person who has a life to go live after they leave the hospital. And exactly what you're saying. I mean, Grace's story is a perfect example. And I've seen just such horrific stories from people who received care or some kind of quote unquote care or surgical intervention. And then basically the second they walk out of that surgical room, the doctor gets to completely wash their hands clean. Like that person no longer matters. And you're right. I mean, Stella and I are pretty critical of the mental health system and the medical care system in lots of ways. Like I don't think gender is completely unique in that way, but on a broad scale, the level of like washing your hands clean of your patients once they leave your office is absolutely disgraceful, especially considering the low evidence base behind these interventions. It's not like something with a good, solid, like medical base, like a statin. You know, you can prescribe a statin and not really worry what happens to the patient after because there's a well-established kind of evidence base behind it. But these procedures are so risky. So it's shocking how little investment physicians are often making in the care of their patients once they're done.
Shocking to the point of thought-provoking, where you're thinking, really? Really? And then I think of, Detrans Awareness Day was a little while ago, and we had a webinar, Genspect had a webinar, and this lovely detransitioner spoke about how when she contacted her clinic to say, I'm detransitioning, their reply by email, and that's all it was, she was 21, like she was young. And the reply was, we'll discharge you now, thank you very much. You know, you're detransitioning, you're discharged, is the answer. Yeah, as opposed to, what can we do for you? You're discharged. That was the reply to, I'm detransitioning. Extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think there's another point to be made in all of that, which is your relative situation, Sasha, is very familiar to me because I'm dealing with very serious situation. And if I went to my clinician and I said, I've stopped eating well, I've started, I don't know, smoking crack or something, I've stopped doing any exercise, and I'm not socializing, and I'm not talking to any of my family, but all of that will go away if you cure me. Now, in my case, that's actually a reasonable proposition, right? That's not a hypothesis. I don't have some wild hypothesis that if I didn't have stage 4 cancer, I think things would be better. Whereas when we're talking about transition, so much of it is the grass is always greener, and you've covered, well, everyone here has spoken in their own way about how so many complicated things get funneled into the grass is always greener. So many different problems get this one univariate kind of explanation. So even if there was some evidence that this is always the right thing to do, even if we did have a diagnostic base, even if there was some way to look into people's souls and say, yes, you will definitely be happier in so many years' time, we can say that for certain, it's still not appropriate. What a good medical professional does is, let's say I turn up and let's say I say my diet has completely gone, I now have one food group and it's Cheetos. It's not acceptable for me to turn around. It's not acceptable for my consultant to say, well, that's your problem. She has to say, well, wait, hold on a minute. We need to sort you out with a dietitian. We need to talk to other people in the healthcare field. So we know, particularly in America, but elsewhere as well, that at the Tavistock, the healthcare in silos, the refusal to talk to eating disorder people, specialists in neurodiversity, even things as basic as specialists in exercise. This is abnormal. This is not the way normal healthcare works. Every other field of medicine works with a collaboration with other fields, not this kind of fiefdom attitude.
So that we got started on that because I was asking you what you were talking about, Alasdair. you and I are also going to do a panel with Benjamin about the boys, the lost boys, who so much of the emphasis is on the young women who transition. But we're going to, and every time Benjamin and Alasdair and I get together, we end up talking about masculinity in one way or another. So we're going to continue that conversation. And then Stella, you're going to be talking about conversion therapy bans, aren't you?
Yeah, I think it's very important to talk about conversion therapy bans, which is kind of where the psychological kind of merged with the legal, and suddenly governmental authorities are coming in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before, into the psychology rooms, into clinics, to say how we should be kind of conducting ourselves within the psychological realm. It's an extraordinary event where they've glommed on, gender identity onto an awful lot of conversion therapy bills. And all these conversion therapy bills feel very unnecessary because there's very little evidence that there is conversion therapy among ethical, accredited mental health professionals. They might be among religious zealots. And people, frankly, the only place they found it, they did a 20-year scoping document in Ireland looking for conversion therapy. The only place they found it was among religious zealots who were also performing exorcisms. So this is how extreme it is, if you follow me. And it's nowhere near the likes of me with our candles and our kind of good vibes and our come on in and sit down and here's your comfy cushion and your chair. It's so far from what any ethical therapist these days would be performing. But because of the way it's very badly worded, because they don't seem to really, the word that, for example, gender expression gets thrown into conversion therapy bans, not even just gender identity, but gender expression. It's like, what are they even talking about? It's very badly worded, very sloppy, or else purposely sloppy. Anyway, I'm going to give a talk on conversion therapy, what it is, what it isn't, and how ethical therapists should not and do not do anything like conversion therapy. And that's very important. Yeah, our podcast will be streaming probably. It'll be the Friday night, Sasha, and it'll be I think it's 7:00. But we haven't quite. We're not being religious about our details, but yeah, scheduled in 7 p.m. Irish time. Be there, be square.
Yeah, and if I can stay awake the whole time, that will be fantastic, because I'm an early riser and early to bed, so we'll have to caffeinate Sasha heavily.
Yeah, but you're 8 hours ahead or something in Phoenix, so you'll be all right.
Okay.
You won't be too bad.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I put in a plug for me? I'm going to be talking about autogynephilia. It's interesting. I started reading about autogynephilia a long time ago. I mean, I think it was in 2012 or 13 when I first hit upon it. And I actually, back then, had some email exchanges with Anne Lawrence, trying to clarify some ideas I had about it. And the way it's described in the literature has never satisfied me. I've always found that talking about erotic target errors sounds like it's this very precise, understood thing. I don't think that actually means anything. I think that's just bullshit, excuse me. And I also found, I read all of Anne Lawrence's book, Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, which is one of the greatest titles ever. But I read the whole book, and it's so frustrating because it's completely uninformed by any idea of trauma, attachment theory, anything a psychodynamic therapist might think. Mm-hmm. So it just didn't sit right to me. And as it turned out, when I started working with BeyondTrans and I started working in the gender space, I'm working with a number of men who have this issue. So I've been really lucky to get a chance to know these young men and to find out what makes them tick, how they got there. And it turns out to be kind of a continuation of what I was talking with you two about on the podcast. It's my ideas about shame and narcissism. It's all of a piece. So I'm going to be presenting clinical material, some pretty interesting clinical material, on with these guys, and then right after me, Lisa Marciano is going to present a case, and then she and I are going to do a Q&A together with the audience. So
that's great.
I'm super excited about that.
Oh, can I ask you a question about that? Because I'm aware that there's a lot of fractioning whenever you get a group of like very very engaged and opinionated people, right? And I think there's some kind of fractioning going on around this autogynephilia concept. And I think Stella and I have had lots of conversations. We've talked to different voices, and you're right. You're pointing out that a lot of the kind of sexologists and the early research was very, very like data driven and very like focused on what's considered paraphilia, but it doesn't really explore a psychological underpinning of that experience, right? And then I think there are parents whose male children are experiencing gender dysphoria, and I think many of them are comforted by a concept that Stella and I have put forward, which is, and you too as well, Alasdair, that like there's something else going on with these males. They're not pure autogynephilia the way maybe like Anne Lawrence has written about in her book. But you're talking about the psychological piece. Like, I think this is interesting, and I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, Stella, but like my thoughts on this are really open to evolving and changing, because really this is not an area I know a ton about. But do you notice this too? There's like these kind of camps popping up, like, no, my son is just a quirky, nerdy guy. There's nothing sexual going on. And then there's like the pure autogynephiles that are like, this is just how we're born and like, don't question us. Even though they acknowledge autogynephilia. Like, it's interesting. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, if you think about that for a few seconds, you'll see that there's so much shame in this area. The parents are ashamed. I mean, let's face it, the idea of men, dressing up in their mother's clothes and masturbating, they're not exactly sympathetic, people. They're open to a lot of hostility and ridicule. And so it's natural for the parents to say, no, not my kid. And it's also natural for the AGPs to say, it's just the way I'm made. I'm born this way, and there's nothing else going on, nothing to be ashamed about. Right. So, it all kind of bears out what I thought would be there once I, took a deeper look. But it's a very one last thought. It's a very fraught space. You notice like there was this big pile-on recently on Jamie Lee Curtis. Her son is kind of like, he looks to me like an obvious autogynephile, and they were vicious to him on Twitter. And to the point where Jamie Lee Curtis finally put in all caps, back the F off, to protect her child. But they're hated. I mean, the AGPs are hated, by the feminists. Boy, it's an intense space for sure.
And can I add, this is a space that Genspect has resided very uncomfortably but insistently since we began, which is being willing to discuss these thorny issues. So I'm delighted Joe is going to be presenting his view and his thoughts on autogynephilia, which are well informed, which are thoughtful and well informed, but which are not. We're not in the consensus, if you follow me. There will be people in the audience, there will be other speakers at the conference who will utterly disagree with Joe. And that's great, because that's how you get better outcomes, when people disagree and say, oh my God, I don't agree at all, and I'm going to speak at the end of this, when he speaks, when the Q&A come, I'm going to stand up and frankly rant about how, I look forward to, and I can think of people who will stand up in the audience and say, no, you've got it all wrong. These are the points. And won't we all be the better for it? Like, it feels almost like, it's the classical, liberal view, but like that, of course we disagree. And yes, of course we're civilized about the fact we disagree. We welcome disagreement, have more disagreement and bring us together, because we will get each other thinking. And it seems so fundamental, but it's been lost. So an awful lot of conference, I've been at too many of them, we all agree, we shout and whoop, yay, on to the next speaker. We all agree. Yes, well done. Clap, clap, clap. And on to the next. This won't be this. This will be people kind of sitting beside each other who won't be so naturally, and that's what's needed. That is healthy. I strongly believe it's healthy. But yeah, it's a little bit uncomfortable, but hopefully adults, we can handle that.
I think Stella and I are going head to head in the debate. I think we're on opposing sides, if I recall correctly.
The pronouns debate?
Woohoo!
Yeah, I think so. Which just goes to prove, which is good, right? That's good.
Yeah.
But it's not.
That's amazing.
It's basically.
Do pronouns really matter? Are they important?
Well,
Wait, what's
like
each of your positions?
It's not quite, in my mind, it's not quite do they matter, it's do we talk about them too much?
We're already disagreeing. My point is that they're not as important as everybody tells us. So we'll have two different debates. He'll be off debating his point and I'll be debating mine.
Yeah, I disagree.
with a mirror.
I disagree.
That's
I think they're
interesting.
more important,
I'm very
but I think
curious.
we talk about them in the wrong way.
Okay, all right. Any specific?
Oh yeah, there's something
events?
big. Yeah, there's something big I want to bring in. Joe is the clinical lead for BeyondTrans, and we're very proud of BeyondTrans. It's certainly the most arduous part of Genspect. It takes a lot of, effort, and we really try to treasure it. But it's also a brilliant part of Genspect, if you follow me. And what it is we're providing services to people who've been harmed by medical transition. And so during the conference, we've offered detransitioners to come over, we've put them up, and they're going to have the panel, which will be very interesting. But there's also 2 different workshops being held just for detransitioners or people who are beyond transition, not just detransitioners. So the first workshop will be on the Friday, and it'll be held by Dr. Julia Mason and Dr. Laurie Reigenstreif. And they will be answering questions because there's so many medical questions that people have been impacted by medical transition. So they'll have their own space. It'll be a small space, their own private space to ask medical questions of doctors.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
I know, it's really good.
Wow.
And if they don't have the answer to hand, because we're aware this is really unknown territory. It's like really going into the kind of Wild West. They are going to research it and come back. So they might take some questions that they'll have to say, because you and I, Sasha, know, we hear people and they say, I've got a sore throat from testosterone. It appears to be something to do with my voice box and larynx, and what will it go away? You know what I mean?
For sure.
Questions like that. So then the second workshop we'll be doing, which I think is going to be amazing, it'll be Dr. Leonore Tiefer, and she's a sexologist. Tiefer, yeah, I always get it wrong. And she is a sexologist and a psychologist, but she was at the first ever WPATH conference. So now she's at the first ever Genspect Conference. So way back in 1979, she was at the first ever WPATH one. It was called the Harry Benjamin Society, but they were an association. And she's going to be providing a workshop for about intimacy and about relationships, which is such a difficult aspect of living a life when you've been harmed by medical transition. So I think they are 2 jewels really in the kind of crown of this conference. And in a way, I think we probably haven't given enough attention to these, because I think they're purely public service, if you follow me. They're just there because these people will be there, and it seems like a very good opportunity to share some knowledge and help them.
There's so much stuff, because I'm just thinking of more, and another, just a couple of things. We're going to have art. We're going to have art from Lordy, or is it? It's Lordy, right? Who's
Sarah Bassi
on Twitter, who does those beautiful portraits of detransitioners. So she's going to bring some of them, so you'll be able to see them. And we're also going to have the wonderful phoenix that keeps on rising from the ashes, uncancelable Nina Paley, who's going to be doing, well, we shouldn't say what yet, but it's going to be very, very good.
But she'll have her comics there. She will have
her comics, so you will get to buy Agents of HAG. Humorous acronym GAG is what HAG stands for. This is my signed copy. And then the other thing is that there's going to be an opportunity to talk about, probably many opportunities actually, but certainly one at least, to have a good in-depth discussion about parents, and about what this is doing to parents and how parents feel and how parents can strategize with this. And again, I know it's a big ask to get to Killarney. It's not actually that big. We forget that there are other
And it's
countries in
very
the world
pretty.
which are a little bit bigger, and it's very pretty, and it's very pretty, and actually,
it is very pretty.
and then you tell somebody from Alberta, and you say like, oh, it's a long way to Killarney, and then it takes them 3 hours to stop laughing when you tell them it's like 3.5 hours from Dublin or something. Like, it's not that far. So I think it has the potential to really shake things up, just to have in the town all of these different people, to have therapists, to have activists, to have transitioned
Lawyers.
people, detransitioned people, lawyers, politicians, journalists, surgeons, and bringing all those perspectives together, it might actually really be a seminal moment.
Yeah.
But, even if you can't come, and we encourage everyone to come, it's going to be an extraordinary experience. You can also, for what is it, like €100, €95, you can do the live stream. It might be with a slight lag, but we're going to be streaming the whole thing, so you can still attend most, not all of it, but there are other ways to attend and to support the work that Genspect does.
We're going to have as well, interestingly, Sasha, the book that you and I contributed to, the Critical Therapy Antidote book, will be there. And thinking on that, I'm going to encourage people to bring their books. So let's say whoever can bring their books, because it'd be a great place for people to be able to sell their books, if you follow me. So the Critical Therapy Antidote book is only out in the last couple of weeks, but there's a few other books. Obviously, there's the biggies like Material Girls by Kathleen Stock, and there's, Trans by Helen Joyce, but there's lots of other interesting books that could be for sale if people do. The Countess will be coming from Ireland, and they'll have some literature there. And we're going to give... Yes. My lovely book. I'm still shy about it. I'll get over it. I'm launching it soon, so I'll get over it. I get very shy about things like that. But yes, my lovely book will be there. And as well as that, there's going to be an Irish section on the Saturday where there would be a lot of opportunities for Irish people to come together and talk about it, because we're in that really strange position where we got in gender ID before anybody. 2015 we got in gender ID, but nothing really happened because there was very little gender issues in the country. And then we have the fight between the children's services and the adult service, where the children's services followed the affirmative and the adult services literally rejected WPATH. So we're in a really weird, very Irish position, I would argue. And so we're going to have a panel on, gender ideology in schools. We're going to talk about self-ID. So I think it's very good and important that we've got an Irish section. We've got some great speakers, like Colette will be talking about religion and cults and gender ideology, and Estelle will be talking about feminism and identitarian, authoritarian politics. And and Iseult will be there. Iseult is an amazing therapist, granddaughter of Maud Gonne, a great hero of Ireland. And she's amazing. She'll be talking about the chilling effect, which you and I, Sasha, know how many therapists choose, and yourself, Joe, as well, how many choose not to work in this because of the chilling effect. That chilling effect is so under acknowledged of what a big deal it is. And she's brilliant on that, so she's going to speak about that.
That's so great. So we have so many notes that we're going to put in to accompany this episode, because, of course, so many of the speakers have been on our show. So if anyone is going to attend or wants to brush up on some of the speakers, you can listen to lots of episodes, and we'll put the Genspect website, of course, in the notes with the way to get there to the conference. This is going to be amazing. I mean, I do think this is going to be a really big moment.
I think so. I really think it will be.
I think it's so interesting the way that the three of us kind of stumbled in on it at the same time, basically, and it's just one of those ideas that happened before we knew it, which kind of tells you, it feels like the rhythm is correct. This is the way we were all headed.
Yeah.
Yeah. You sometimes an event, sometimes you have an idea and you just think, of course. And I remember hearing that something about somebody who wrote a song. It's a really well-known song. And he was asked about it, and he said it was a kind of a feeling of putting on the glove and the glove fitted. There's a kind of a feeling of this. It's just like, of course this should happen. And yes, it should happen at the same time. That's That's what I think.
In America, the glove fitting has a very different
Oh, yeah,
connotation,
yeah.
as Joe and I know. The O.J. Simpson trial. So we do not want to be associated in any way, shape, or form with that type of glove fitting. However, we get what you mean, Stella.
I don't know what to say to that. I'm so scared when I fall into American politics inadvertently. All I think is, can I just come back out? Because you're all going to kill me.
Last night I watched on YouTube like a bunch of different Irish sayings and like social norms. And I was like, oh, I understand why Stella says sorry all the time and why you say bye 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 bye. I love all of this kind of cross-cultural sharing. It's going to be awesome.
Okay.
Did you know, Sasha, that in this country, one of the ways that people greet you on the street, if you're just walking on the street, is they just say, well?
Oh, yeah.
When you first move here, it's really frightening. Because you're like,
well, what?
What did I do? What? And it's just an abbreviation for "Are you well?" And it's it takes a bit of getting used
it's not just a very confrontational people. It's a different thing.
No, and you know how if like you were telling a
doing
story, if you were telling a story and you went like, "Oh, you get out of here! You're kidding me! You're kidding me! You're kidding me!"
Yeah.
In Ireland, "You're kidding me! You're kidding me" is "Go away." So you'll be talking to somebody and they'll say, "Go away. Go away, go away, go away." And it's very strange.
One I do, and it doesn't translate, is I say, don't talk to me about Sasha. And people are like, okay, I won't talk to you about Sasha.
I think there's like a whole category of phrases that are Stella-isms, and then some are culturally rooted. So like, as I was watching this video, I was like, some of this is just Stella, I think.
No, that's not true. Go away with that.
Don't talk to me about that.
Don't talk
All
to
right.
me.
Well, there'll be much more of this to come in person, I imagine. Any other like last things that we want to send off our listeners with? I think we covered a lot.
I think this is going to be a first of a meeting of all sorts of people who've never met. I saw Stephanie Davis-Arai saying to Benjamin, "Oh, we'll have that coffee." And I said then, "Oh, Sasha's going to meet Benjamin." And I think this... And I think, Ken Zucker, so many people want to meet Ken Zucker. And then Michael Biggs, who almost feels like an enigma. There's just so many people to meet. There's something about meeting in person. Yes, it's nice to have things online. There's something very powerful. It's very powerful. And I really think, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of meeting in person and the ideas that spring from conversations that happen when you meet in person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention that it's going to be really fun and we're going to laugh a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
for
so.
sure. Okay. Well, that was a lovely chat, and I guess I will see you all in Killarney.
Yay.
I can't wait.
Well,
great.
It's like a month.
Thank you,
and a bit.
Sasha. Thank you, Stella.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens. Listener support means a lot to us. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes and leave a review.
For more information, visit widerlenspod.com. There you'll learn about joining our listener community, how to contribute to our show, and where to find us on social media.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.